Welcome, all my fellow Washington brethren and sister. I am your man and president, Washington football team fan, Luke. Thank you for joining me here on the Washington Football Report. Day one of involuntary minis took place on Tuesday, and the whole gang is back together. Chase Young was in attendance. Everybody was there that was supposed to be there. There were a couple of excused absences. I know of one in particular. John Bostic was not in attendance. Also absent was Curtis Samuel, who, remember, if you recall Ron talking about him last week at the voluntary minis, where he was working off on a side field and he had a groin injury and they didn't want to push him. Well, they obviously don't need to push him any further right now, so he was not on the field practicing. However, it was good to see the guys back out there together. And, I had a tweet that I thought was pretty funny, not to toot my own horn, but, from time to time, I'll toot, toot. Anyway, I saw a tweet from Ben Standing, and these beat reporters, they're there or whatever, and they tweet out things. And, Ben was tweeting out that Ryan Fitzpatrick's passes are impeccably accurate. And I'm like, really, dude? Day one of involuntary minis, and this is what you're tweeting out? Seriously? That's what I was thinking to myself. Like, it was a veiled shot at the other quarterbacks that have been there, specifically Dwayne, who was wildly inaccurate at these things. But I was like, okay, whatever. So, like what felt like 2 seconds later, there's a tweet from one of JP's boys that do the podcast with JP Finley, and it essentially had the two tweets back to back, from one from Ben Standing, the one about Fitzpatrick's passes, and the next one was from Jackson Didlake, who is another beat reporter who was there at practice, that said, William Jackson III picks off Ryan Fitzpatrick, the defense goes wild. And the tweet said, this sums up Ryan Fitzpatrick essentially in a nutshell. And I'm thinking to myself, yep, that's about right. That's why I envision, and it's practice, guys. Like, look, when I say these things, I kid. I say them in jest. I don't take this stuff seriously because it's practice. Shit happens in practice. If you've ever played football, there's a lot of shit that happens in practice that does not happen in the game. Okay? We've heard practices where quarterbacks have thrown 5 interceptions. They don't go out and throw 5 interceptions on Sunday. Shit happens in practice all the time. You want to make your mistakes in practice so you don't make them in the game. That said, that's Ryan Fitzpatrick, though, folks. For all of you, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's much better now, and you can't go off of what he did the first 16 years of his career. Look at what he did in Miami last year. Good for you. I said all of this to say that I tweeted out essentially a bunch of laughing emojis and then a bunch of face palm emojis, and then a meme or a GIF of Kanye West laughing and then not laughing, and going from laughing to serious in a matter of seconds. And that's essentially the emotions I had of seeing the tweet from Ben Standing about him throwing passes. Like, okay, Ben, really? Seriously, guy? And then finding it funny initially when I saw the tweet that had the Jackson Didlake, he just threw an interception, and the Ben Standing tweet right next to each other on the timeline as he screenshotted it and then posted it along with a tweet saying this is what sums up Ryan Fitzpatrick in a nutshell. I found that funny initially, but then you think about it for a second, you're like, did his ass just really throw an interception? And you're like, here that shit go again. Again, it's a fleeting thought, and I'm not one of those guys. I live and die on every throw in practice. No, that's not me, and you guys know that. But I found it funny. I just thought it was something to bring up. Anyway, I digress. I want to talk about So it's good to hear that William Jackson is making plays in practice. That's also a positive too, because I was listening to Logan Thomas, and I'm going to talk about things that I gleaned from the 6 guys that spoke. 6 players talked after day 1 of involuntary minis, and so did Coach Ron Rivera. I'll have that in a second, but I do want to say that Logan Thomas, in what he was talking about, specifically said, "Hey, the defense has been getting the best of us, so it felt good to get out there and make some plays." So the offense had their fair share of plays, and they were a lot crisper in day 1 of involuntary minis than they were in the voluntary portions, for sure. So anyway, let's start with Ron Rivera and what he had to say. And he talked about it was good to have everybody out there, including Chase Young, and to see him out there. And he said he looked outstanding in his first work with the team. He said it's just fun to be out there with all the guys, seeing the development of some of these players, seeing everybody in good shape and whatnot. He talked about the decision to have a training camp in Richmond. Now, it's going to be an abbreviated Richmond visit. It's not going to be like the traditional go down to Richmond for like 3 weeks or so and be pretty much live in Richmond, stay there, and have practices there. They're going to literally go down there, kind of go through the song and dance of conditioning drills, things of that nature, and 1 or 2 practices, and then they're going to bring it back to Ashburn. So they're not going to be in Richmond for very long, but they do want to go there. And Ron pretty much said, look, it's still COVID season. Like, it's still COVID's still a thing. Like, we're getting back to a level of normalcy, but COVID is still real. It's still out there, and it's still a thing, and we do want to make sure we're mindful of that. But at the same time, we do want to honor those fans in Richmond and let them know that we value them, and we missed them last year, and we want to make it up to them. So talked about going out there and doing that. And, Ron was pretty excited just about getting back out there, seeing all of the talent that they've amassed and seeing them in, one setting. It's good, and he's really positive about the steps that have been taken and the strides that have been made with all of the additions to the roster. But obviously you have to see it. You have to go out and you have to play and you have to prove it. And, that's kind of where they are right now, is continuing to coach. But he said, the beauty of year 2 versus year 1 for him was obviously that these guys have been in the system now. They know what to expect from the coaching staff, and vice versa. The coaching staff knows what they have in these players. Remember, when everybody got here last year, it was a filling out process. Ron wasn't giving out any contracts. He didn't know what these players were about, and he needed to see who were his workers and who were his best players. And, he needed to be able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Well, that filling out process is over. He knows who's who, and those guys know who these coaches are and what is expected of them. And they are in year 2. And the one thing that I'm most excited about is the continuity, because I don't think we talk about this enough, but it is something that is so vital to the success of teams in the league. Is how comfortable are you in the scheme and system that you're in? How many years have you been in the same system? When there's constant change and turnover, it's hard to get comfortable. When you've got a new offensive coordinator, and then you got another new offensive coordinator, and then the head coach gets fired, so a new guy comes in, and you got a new defensive scheme, and you got a new defensive coordinator, and then that head coach gets fired, and there's a new defensive scheme, and it's just tiring to keep learning things over and over and over again. And you can never fully just get comfortable and say, all right, I know the plays, I know the verbiage. Now I can fine tune the smaller, finer details to make me an even better player. These players are getting to do that this year. And it's the first time in a long time. Honestly, it is. You got to go back to Jay Gruden, not his last year, but the year before that, or maybe even 2 years before that, to get to where there was continuity from the year prior. But Jay switched defensive coordinators like twice, and he lost Sean McVay, so there was always turnover, with different positions and different coaches coming in. And then Jay got canned in season, so there was another coach. And then that guy was gone after the season, so there was another coach. And It's just been one change after another. Well, that's not the case this year. Jack Del Rio is back as defensive coordinator. Scott Turner is back as offensive coordinator. All the positional coaches are back, essentially, and are intact. And all the guys, even the one difference that we have, which is our wide receivers coach, Drew Terrell, taking over for Jim Hostler, they're both still on the staff. And Drew Terrell was here last year as the assistant wide receivers coach. Now he's just the receivers coach. There's no assistant attached to it. So there is no change. These guys are comfortable. They know the staff. They know what's expected of them. And again, vice versa, the staff knows these players and they can grow in year two. And Ron kind of spoke to that. Like, now, guys can go out and just play. Guys can be faster in what they're doing. They don't have to think as much. So that is something that I think we don't talk about enough as fans, but that stuff is vital to the success of teams. You look around the league and you look at the teams that win and win big, they're not changing coaches and coordinators. Even though, the more success you have, more likely it is you're going to have an offensive or defensive coordinator plucked from your staff. You look at the Chiefs, it's the same dudes, man, running the show. It's Andy, it's Eric Bieniemy, it's Spags on the defensive side. Like, it's the same crew. They running it back. Same thing in Tampa, same crew. They running it back. Green Bay, same crew, running it back. Like, the good teams in the league, they don't have a bunch of turnover. Obviously you're going to lose coaches if you're successful. It's a part of the business. But if that's not happening and everybody's doing their job effectively, there's no need to have 87 different coaches. So that's something that is really positive. So let's get to the players who spoke. And we start with the Don Dada. Chase Young, the man, the myth, the legend, all of that good jazz. The guy that wasn't here and it was a big deal for no reason. So he had to address that at the beginning of his presser, where he pretty much said, look, I was in contact with the coaches. They knew what was up. And Ron even said it in his presser. Look, Chase, it's a part of the game. He's like, that's ball. This dude, his schedule is crazy. When you making, all of the bread he's making off on the side, and you're as big of a deal as he is, everybody wants a piece. So he ain't just doing Chipotle commercials. He's like, yeah, I got an Under Armour spot. I got an eBay commercial coming out. Like, he's like, yo, I got a bunch of stuff going on. You know what I mean? Like, I wanted to be here, but I got shit going on. What you want me to do? I ain't turning down opportunities to make bread. This is the only time. Players, this is the only time you have an opportunity to shoot these commercials, to do these spots, is in the offseason. Once the season gets here, he can't leave and go do a Gatorade commercial. No, he got to do that shit now. So, you can't have it both ways. And they're fine with that. The only people making a big deal out of it were some of the fans and the media kept asking questions. Like, look, it's Chase Young. The dude's in shape. Ron wasn't worried. Would he prefer him to be there? Sure. But Ron wasn't worried about Chase. He's the last dude that Ron's worried about. He'll show up in great shape, ready to rock and roll. So that's why I said I wasn't worried. Anyway, he explained that away, and then he talked about what year two meant for him. But that wasn't the biggest nugget from Chase Young. I think the biggest nugget was he said, I wasn't never healthy last year. I tweet, and I had forgot all about the hip. You guys remember in camp, he left practice early one day, and we were all nervous. We were holding our collective breaths, and we were like, oh my God, what is going on with Chase Young? He left practice early, and then he missed like a practice or two, and then he was back. Well, that was the hip tweak. And I remember him tweaking his hip. I mean, he was back like 2-3 practices later, and I was like, oh, we're good. He was never good. And you know what I learned this playoffs in the NBA is that one injury can affect another, and it could be this, downward spiral. Shit can start going downhill off of just one injury. And it makes sense because when you injure one part of your body, you start to overcompensate in other areas. And next thing you know, this breaks down because this isn't working properly. And because you have to overcompensate for this now, this breaks down. And so his hip injury caused the groin injury that he ultimately got in week 3 versus the Browns, which cost him a game. And he was never right after the hip injury. He's like, yeah, I'll just battle through it. It is what it is. And so he's like, I'm fully healthy now, and you don't have to worry about thinking about your injury and how do I move and how do I not aggravate it any worse and further do damage. I can just go out and play now. So think about this. He was dealing with that and thinking about that all last year while he was playing. And he did what he did as a rookie. Let that sink in. And, he wasn't right at the end of the season. He was dealing with a bunch of stuff. We knew that. You remember late, in that Tampa Bay game, there were plays where he wasn't in. He was banged up late in the season. But he was fighting the whole year. What I didn't realize was this started in training camp, and it never ended. He just kept fighting. And that's what a lot of times with these players, we don't know what the hell they're dealing with. These dudes are gladiators. They really are. More so than any other sport. These football players, they endure a lot of shit. They put up with a lot of injuries, nagging injuries, things that linger, that don't go away, that won't go away until the season's over, and they just push for it. They take pain medication, and they do different things. They get treatment, and they just tough it out. These dudes, they're different. And Young had an injury last year, and he just played through it like a warrior, man. That speaks volumes, man. But anyway, that was the biggest takeaway from Chase Young. He said, look, I've been working on some things. He talked about some of the exercises he's been doing. He said, look, I've been having ankle problems since college. So I don't think I'm going to have those problems anymore, though, because I'm doing these exercises. I've been working out with no shoes on and, with these, the little feet shoes where you put your individual toes into them. And he's like, I think I might have solved that problem. So we'll see about that. I'm happy that he feels like he's going to be 100% healthy and in a better position to wreak havoc. Because if that was injured Chase Young that we saw last year, what does healthy Chase Young in year 2 look like? Scary even. Anyway, Logan Thomas, I kind of told you what he already had to say. He talked about, being in year 2. He talked about the offense getting the best of the defense in practice in day 1 of the involuntary minis. But, specifically talking about himself, he feels like there's more growth for him. He's really comfortable now. Last year, was his first year as a starter. And now he feels like he's able to really dig in as he's kind of settled in on his role on the team. But he also said he also recognizes what he is at the tight end position, and that is now the leader of that group. Because last year, coming in, he was just like the rest of those guys trying to prove himself. There was no distinction between him, Tamarick, Hemingway, other than one guy was brought in to be the starter and the other guy was trying to fight for a roster spot. But none of those guys had any equity built up with the staff nor the fan base. They had to go out and prove it. Well, he did, and now you look around, and he's the only guy with any true experience on this roster and success. So now you got a rookie in Bates, you got a rookie in Sammy Reyes, and a bunch of other guys that are fighting to try to make this team, and they're all looking to him. And he's like, yeah, I'm imparting knowledge on them when I can, kind of showing them, the little things that I've learned over the time of making this transition. And he talked about Sammy Reyes, and he's like, my situation isn't dissimilar from his. I wasn't, a basketball player necessarily, but I had to make the switch from quarterback, and it was different for me. I knew the rules to the game and all of that stuff, but, it's definitely a transition. And he's like, yeah, I did play basketball like he did, and a lot of the traits for those two sports are really similar, and they really are transferable characteristics and attributes to football. But he's a sponge, he being Sammy Reyes, and he's soaking up all the information, and he's got a long way to go. But this guy's made tremendous strides, and he's really bright, and he's getting it. But obviously it's a learning curve. So he talked about that. He talked about just the tight end room and position as a whole, and he thinks that they've gotten better at that position. And so that's awesome to hear. But again, we have to see it. And Chase Young said also, and this was one of the things that you might have seen in a tweet or on socials, is that on paper that, hey, this could be the best defense in the league. But he like, hey, we got to go out and prove it. We got to go out and show that. But on paper, we got all the tools, we got all the dudes, we got all the dogs. Now we just got to go hunt, essentially. We'll see. Chase Roulier spoke. We don't hear from him very often. But, what I found the most interesting about his interview was he said, now that there's no more Morgan Moses, and essentially it's just me and Brandon Sheriff on the line that are veterans, and, it's different when you get your money, because it's hard for you to assume a leadership position when you haven't been paid yet. Like, Chase can come in and do that because he's a first-round draft pick. The team is already invested in him. But when you're Chase Roulier, you're a 5th, 6th round pick out of Wyoming, and you playing for peanuts essentially on the back end of your rookie deal, it's hard for you to speak up because ain't nobody really trying to hear nothing from you. Now that Chase Roulier has gotten his extension and he knows he's going to be here for the long haul, and he looks around at the rest of the offensive line, and now it's just him and Brandon Sheriff, and Sheriff's on a 1-year prove it deal essentially on a 1-year franchise tag, and he could be gone next offseason. He's like, yeah, I need to step up and become a leader now. I recognize that there's a void left by Morgan Moses no longer being here, and it's Sheriff's. He didn't necessarily speak on Sheriff's, contract situation and being on a franchise tag, but he acknowledges in his mind that at least he might not be here after this year. So I do need to be a little bit more vocal. I do need to step up and have that leadership role. You don't really hear guys say that a lot of times. They kind of shy away from the leadership, tag that's trying to be placed upon them. Chase Young kind of said, I don't necessarily need to be a bigger leader now that RK isn't here. I'm just continue to do my thing. Terry said the same thing. Like, I don't really need to be more of a leader. I just kind of, I just need to lead by example type of deal. It's refreshing to hear a dude because, honestly speaking, Terry knows he's got to be a leader on this team. We're a young team, and we're going to have young leaders. That's what young teams do. They have young leadership. You can't have a young team and still be looking for veterans to lead because it ain't a lot of veterans on this team. So, by nature, if you don't have a bunch of 30-somethings, you got a bunch of 20-somethings running around, you're going to have 20-something-year-old leadership. And it just so happens that some of our youngins are wise beyond their years. Terry came in off the rip, and we was like, he different. He act like he been in the league 8 years, and he just got here. So he's different. Chase Young, same deal. He's different. He got here, and he felt like an 8-year veteran right out of the gate. Those dudes are different. So even though they're young, you want them to be leaders. And Chase Roulier now, rather, I'm talking about, is like, now I got to step up and I got to be a leader. I acknowledge that. I need to be a leader on this offensive line, especially being that it's just me and B. Sheriff holding it down as the veterans of the group. We're going to have 3 different guys on the line this year. So I need to step up and be more vocal. So I said, all right, Chase, I hear you, bro. Chase Roulier stepping up into a leadership role. I like it. I like it a lot. Kendall Fuller spoke, and he didn't really. I usually don't get much from Kendall. Kendall's pretty reserved, and he's like, yeah, he answer your questions, but he gonna put too much sauce on it. His sandwich is pretty bland. He ain't adding too many condiments to it. You ask a question, you get an answer, we move on. I usually know when I see Kendall Fuller show up, it's about to be a 4.5, 5 minute, interview. So. Not much to really gain from him. He talked about the coverages that they were playing towards the end of the season. Like, everybody's making a big deal about us playing a little bit more man this year. Well, we played different coverages towards the end of the season. Yeah, you did. That's why we was getting our ass toasted and roasted at the end of the season. Carolina had some big plays against us. Obviously we gave up some big plays in the playoff game against Tampa Bay. But that's nor here nor there. He's like, yeah, we might be doing some different things this year. And it'll be interesting to see how everything goes. I thought they didn't ask him some questions that I really wanted to hear, like, hey, are you gonna be playing some nickel this year? Are you gonna be playing some safety? Have they moved you around at all? Like, even if he's not going to give you the information, I thought it was still questions worth asking, but that's nor here nor there. I didn't really get a lot from Kendall Fuller. Steven Montez, on the other hand, was interesting because obviously it's Steven Montez. You don't really need to hear from the fourth string quarterback and a guy more likely than not that's not going to be here when the roster dust settles and it's the smoke clears. However, it was interesting to hear him talk about, him willing to do whatever. Like I'm first of all, I was glad, I was so honored that they asked me to come back, because you never know with these things. He didn't have to be back. They had three quarterbacks with the addition of Ryan Fitzpatrick. They had Jordan Ta'amu coming here for one of these minis, and they could have been impressed with him and said, all right, Jordan, you in. Hey, really appreciate you, Steven, but you out. They didn't do that. They like him. They think that he has some traits and some qualities that intrigue them. And he said, look, I play whatever position they want me. Wherever they want to put me, I'm down, I'm game, I'm ready to do for, whatever. So that was interesting. And he talked about how he was essentially attached at the hip to Alex Smith last year. He's like, yo, Alex was my guy. Wherever he went, I went with him. He probably was tired of me because I was literally everywhere he went. I was there. And so he said, I gained so much from Alex Smith last year. And he's like, I plan on doing the same thing with Ryan Fitzpatrick this year. He's a veteran. He's in the room. We really love his presence. And the guy is super smart. And I've learned a lot from him already in this short period of time. So he's like, yeah, we just continue to grow. And then they asked him, well, how much more difficult is it on you to be learning all these other positions, but still having to put in the work and time and effort that goes in the quarterback position? We know how hard that is as a standalone position by itself. Now you got to add in various positions. He's like, you just got to put in extra work. Simple as that. You got to put in extra work. So we heard from Steven Montez, and then finally Charles Leno Jr. I thought he was really intriguing. For the first time hearing him speak, I thought he was really intriguing. He talked about the whirlwind that was him getting cut by the Bears. His wife was pregnant and about to give birth to their child, and it was just a really crazy time for him. And he said Washington feels right. He loves the energy in the building. He loves the coaching staff and Rivera and everybody that's there. And he's like, I really feel like this is home for me. Like, this feels right. I mean, what is he supposed to say? But, in saying that, he's like, yeah, I'm taking the young guys under my wing, specifically Sam Cosmi and Sadiq Charles. Like, those dudes are, for lack of a better phrase, are his projects. He's like, I see a lot of myself in them because I was a late round draft pick, and neither one of those guys are late round draft picks. Sadiq is a fourth and Samuel Cosmi is a second. But he's like, when you're young and you come into this league, you don't know. You just come in and you just try to work hard. But, there are other things that you got to be able to do that can separate you from the rest of the pack. And he's like, I'm trying to get them all the game that I got, essentially. And so he's been a really good influence. And that's what Travell Wharton, the assistant offensive line coach, essentially said. And it was funny to hear the very next day, Charles Leno Jr. echoed that, because he's like, literally, that's what I'm doing. I'm essentially taking these boys under my wing, showing them the ropes. I actually thought that there might have been a little bad blood between him and Cornelius Lucas, because soon as Washington signed Charles Leno Jr., Lucas had tweeted out, essentially that he was being disrespected and that he was going to show everybody. But I don't think that was directed towards Leno Jr. as much as it was the fact that every time he feels like he's gaining some traction, something like this happens. They go out and get a guy. Like, he's not enough. So I think he was feeling like, okay, I'm going to show y'all. Y'all don't think I can do this. What I did last year wasn't good enough. I'm going to show y'all, essentially what he was tweeting. But no, he was, Charles Leno was like, yeah, me and Luke was just watching some film together, because they had asked him about Chase Young and what kind of a player he is. And he was like, he's a very, very good player. And he's the kind of guy that is going to be ridiculous, because, and he said, I've blocked really good players, playing as long as I have in the league, and blocking Khalil Mack in practice every day for the most part over the last 5 years or so. I know what talent looks like, and this guy has it, and he's willing to put in the work. And he was like, his ability to adjust and adapt and not think, not, have necessarily a plan. And if the plan doesn't work, what do I do now? He's like, he could just react, and that's what makes him special. And he said him and Cornelius Lucas were watching the film on Chase Young and just saying, man, this dude is freaky. He's crazy. So those guys have a relationship for sure. So, Cornelius Lucas, it's interesting to see where he's going to fit in the puzzle. He may ultimately be the swing tackle. I think Charles Leno is going to be the left tackle, starting left tackle. I think they want Samuel Cosmi to win the right tackle job. Doesn't mean he's going to, but I think that's who they would prefer to play there. They drafted him in the second round, and they didn't draft him to sit him on the bench, just like they wanted Sadiq Charles to play last year. They didn't draft him in the fourth round for him to sit on the bench. They want him to play. So I think ultimately all three of those guys, Sadiq Charles at left guard, Sam Cosmi at right tackle, and Charles Leno at left tackle could be the combination. And Cole Luke could be the guy on the outside looking in. Cornelius Lucas could be the guy on the outside looking in. And that, to me, would be comforting to know. Worst case scenario, one of these tackles goes down. Cornelius Lucas is the guy that's going to step in. I'd feel really confident about his ability after seeing what he did last year. Feel really good about him stepping in if need be. So that was essentially what was said, and tidbits from practice day one of involuntary minis. I appreciate you guys chopping it up with me, taking the time out of your busy schedules and day to watch this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'll have more coverage. If we hear from more players, which I assume we will, maybe a coach or two, I'll bring you some more coverage as it comes. I'm going to give it. But until then, I'm your man, Louie T, signing off. Remember, I am a Washington fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Washington spirit will never die. Washington spirit will never fold. Until we meet again, hail to the beloved burgundy and gold. Get off the bench, get in the game, and kick it with me, your man, Louie T. I thank you guys for joining me. And if you haven't already done so, please do me a huge solid and subscribe to the Louie T Network for more great content. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a thing, and hit the like button. Really appreciate you. Leave your comments in the comment section of this video. If you got anything to add, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I'm your man, Louie T. Guys, get out of here and have a good one.
LouieTeeNetwork.